But let's get to the main event. Tonight we have Laura Klein. I'm super excited to have Laura here. She's a lean startup expert and author. Her first book was UX for Lean Startups, which was an amazing book. I love it. Hopefully you guys have read it. And we're here to help celebrate and promote her new book, Build Better Products, which is another great book. I'm super excited about that. She blogs at usersknow.blogspot.com. You should definitely check out her blog posts. They're super insightful. At Laura Klein. Before that, back in the day, she worked with Eric Reese at InView, where she was a senior interaction designer. She also used to be an engineer. Now she's doing some PM stuff, so I like to call her triple threat because she does all three. She's also our first three-peat speaker. That's how awesome she is, the first speaker we've had here 3 times. And I'm super excited. She's going to talk to us about how well do you know your customers and share the concept of user maps, her new framework about user maps from her new book. So Laura, come on up. Give her a warm welcome, guys.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and coming out on this freezing Thursday night. It's Thursday, right? Okay, just checking. It's been a week. So I know Dan already did this, but I didn't get to see. Who here is a product manager? Product manager? UX designer? Excellent. Other? Just general other? Fantastic. Oh, good. Good mix. All right, so presumably all of you are working on a product, yes? Some product. Product has users, I guess, or it should have users. If it doesn't have users, that's the whole idea, is that it will have users. It's not even if it's a nonprofit, it's not an intentional nonprofit. Right, we've all worked on that product that was like, we will have users someday. Absolutely, no question. So here's my question for you. Of that user, or let's say future user, I won't call them hypothetical, how well do you really know them? I mean, not like, on a personal level, like you're going out and getting beers with them, but how well do you really know who your product is for? So, how many of you here thought, oh, I know, it's for moms? Oh, see, some of you have heard me speak before and you know that this is a trap. I can't tell you how often I talk to entrepreneurs and I'm like, so who's your product for? And they're like, oh, it's for moms. Like, really? Is it? We're going to get into that a little bit more later, because it's not. Some of you probably thought, which user? Good for you. I will get back to you as well. But, because a lot of products have a lot of different users, right? Facebook has a couple billion of them. But, again, we'll talk about that in a minute. The point here is that you need to know who your users are, and you need to know more than just their moms or their salespeople or their dentists, right? You need to know about their different needs and goals. You need to know about the behaviors. You need to know how much they pay for products like yours, or if they're likely to. There's a ton of different questions that you need to have answered eventually. And once you know these things, you need to communicate them to your team so that you're all making good decisions. By the way, none of this that I'm saying here should be surprising to any of you. We haven't gotten to the point where I tell you new things, so don't worry. The good news is that there are a ton of different ways that you can learn this, that you can get to know your user and document this. The bad news is I'm going to share one more. But first, I want to talk about a few of the different ways that you already can sort of get to know your user and document this and share it with your team. These are some of the usual suspects. Hopefully, all of you have done some variety of these. Who here has used some of these, one or more? User maps, personas, sorry, not user maps, customer journey maps, personas, empathy maps, great. So since I'm introducing a new way of learning about your user, what I should do, I understand, is I should show you some really crappy version of personas or something and be like, but wait, there's a better way. And if I were a better salesperson, I would do that. Look at how difficult this is. I'll bet that we could do it better. But I'm not going to do that. See, because I like all of those methods. I teach them. I love personas. I love empathy maps. I love customer journey maps. They're fantastic. But like everything else in the world, they're not great for everything. And they're occasionally misused or misunderstood, let's say. Some of them are often misused or misunderstood. Let's take personas as an example. Now, I love them. I think they're fantastic. Who here has made a persona or had a persona made? Great. So you all sort of know generally what they are. Who's been in a situation where they or somebody within the company spent a really, really long time on a persona, getting it just perfect, and then that persona ended up being entirely useless in making any product decisions? It can't just be me. Oh, good, there are a few of you. I have personally been the one to spend all that time on the persona. And there's a reason for that, or there's actually several reasons for that. Because there are a few things specifically that I see people get wrong with personas over and over and over. Again, not intrinsic to the tool, but you can totally use them without screwing them up in this way, but frankly, I never have. One of the biggest problems that I see is that, again, personas tend to be very descriptive, right? Especially when they come out of the marketing department. No offense to marketing, I love marketing, but this is my least favorite part of marketing, that they have a tendency to base things on demographics, or sometimes if they're a little better, psychographics, which generally comes down to saying something like, well, our user is an 18 to 29-year-old male who likes action sports and high-end electronics. And they'll have enough information in them that you feel like it's a real person. You're looking and you're like, oh yeah, no, I totally know that dude. That's great, right? He likes high-end electronics. But, if you're making a productivity app or, a music streaming app, how useful is that piece of information in actually making design or product decisions? Not super useful. Or for example, moms. It's a certain kind of mom. But, there are a lot of moms in the world, right? There are moms in China. There's moms in New York. There are rich moms, poor moms. Angelina Jolie, she's kind of famously a mom, right? The only thing moms necessarily have in common with one another is that at some point they have acquired a child. There's no list of apps that you now have to use that you get on the way out of the delivery room. It's not a thing. The other thing that's tricky about personas is that they tend to identify a user at a very specific point in time. In other words, this is the person who is using your product today, right now. Or if you're doing provisional personas, which are a great tool, it's the hypothetical vision of the person who might someday use my product. But what about that person after they've used your product for a while, right? Products change people. They change our behaviors. They make me sit on the couch and play Candy Crush, for example. Who is that person going to be after they use your product for a while? Who is that person before they start to use your product? Personas don't tend to cover these things. Here's an example. Imagine that you were trying to create a persona for a popular ride-sharing application. And let's say that you go out and you talk to a bunch of people and who are really big users of your product. And it turns out that a lot of them don't own cars because, they get around using the ride-sharing app, and maybe they have really nice bikes because they've decided that they're going to, mostly use ride-sharing, plus, they'll just borrow a car when they need one. But, they're going to spend their money and they're going to bike a lot more and use public transportation. That's fantastic. But if you're going out and you're trying to find new people to use your product, is that necessarily going to be true about them? Maybe you're not necessarily just going to want to go out and interview a bunch of people who don't have cars already. You might want to interview people who would be willing to get rid of their cars, or who have cars but don't use them as much. In other words, the person who is about to start using your product and the person who has been using your product for several months or a year might seem like two entirely different people. What they really are is they're two entirely different versions, sometimes, of the same person. Personas don't tend, again, to do a great job of capturing this. And there are dozens of different mistakes that I see with persona. I told you I'm not going to go into and here is how customer journey maps fail us, because they can be great, but there are a lot of mistakes that people make when doing them. Not here to tell you that they suck. In fact, all of these problems that people have, I don't think it's the fault of the tools. Or is it? I like to inject a little mystery in at this point. See, here's the thing. There's one thing that you could call a flaw in all of these tools, and that is that they are really easy to screw up. They tend to sort of describe an overall process, and you can find lots and lots and lots of gorgeous examples of them on the internet, telling you how the end product should look and the kinds of things that could go in. But there's a lot of room for interpretation. And so when I was creating something, I decided that I wanted to create something that nobody could screw up. Not because I think you're all dumb and need something without sharp corners. That's clearly not true. You're all very smart people and you're all doing very complicated things. And that's why I wanted to create this very simple thing, because you're all smart people who are doing very complicated things, and I didn't feel like you needed another complicated thing on your plate. I wanted something that was so easy that I wouldn't screw it up. Believe me, if there's ever anything that I can come up with that will simplify my life, I am all for it. So here's what I did. I went through a huge number of old projects that I'd worked on, projects that I'd seen other teams work on, and I gathered a huge number of the questions. You're all taking pictures of this, which is great. There's also a higher resolution version of it on the Media Flickr site, where all of the images from the book are available. Dan's going to take a picture of it anyway. That's fine. Dan never listens to me. It's the Rosenfeld Media Flickr account. Yeah, okay, got it. So anyway, I went through all of these different projects, and I found a lot of different questions. Now, a lot of the questions were very specific to whatever the product was. You know, how often do you check email? How often do you drive your car? You know, do you own a nice bike? You know, how does productivity? You know, these really specific things. But then what I found was that there were a few sort of overarching areas that had these questions that always came up over and over and over, and that were really applicable to all the different kinds of products, and that these questions needed to be answered, not always immediately, but at some point during the development of the product, we found ourselves asking these questions. So once I had all those questions, I asked Kate Rudder, who was my illustrator for the book and who is a wonderful illustrator, put them together into an easy-to-follow graphic that I call the user map. This is that. And so I want to go through the various parts of it and talk about sort of why each of these sections and each of these questions are important. So these are the different areas that we care about. So you can see we have channels and influencers, goals and purchase intent, user product fit, context of use, and future use. You can also think of how are you going to attract potential users? How do you know if somebody will become a user? How do you know your product actually fills a need for your users? How is your user going to interact with the product? And then how will your user grow and change? Segment that is determining channels and influencers. Now, before your user becomes your user, we talked about, you know, with the ride-sharing example, they have to hear about your product somewhere, right? They might consult some people about whether or not the product is right for them. They might have questions. So the places that they hear about where they get their information, those are channels. The people that they might consult about whether they want to buy it, those are influencers. So for this part of the map, I want you to answer these three questions. Where does your user learn about products like this? What sorts of messages do they respond to? And who are their influencers or approvers for selecting and buying products like this? This is not in general. This is specifically for the thing that you are making. Now, you may be wondering why we care about any of these things. When I mention words like channels and influencers, a lot of people say things like, I don't need to know about that. That's marketing's problem. Or is it? Okay, yeah, it totally is. But these are how you're going to acquire new users. And this is the sort of information that you need to know in order to do that well. You need to know this in order to know that you have a good solution for these folks. Also, if you're building enterprise products especially, so who here is building an enterprise product? Right. So if you're building an enterprise product, you know how important it can be to know things like that the CIO, who doesn't seem at all involved in this product, can kill it, right? they're an approver. If that's going to need to know about that. Understanding things about messaging and where your potential users hang out and where they hear about products like yours just has an enormous impact on things within the product. It has an enormous impact on things like, positioning within the market and which features you focus on. It can even help you with recruiting new users, because remember, if you know where your users are hanging out, you can recruit them for user research. It's a really good tip. So the next wedge, once you've got people, understanding about your product and knowing that it exists, the next wedge is what helps users' goals and purchase intent. This is basically, why would somebody even try your product? And, that's, again, a reasonably important question to answer that sometimes people can't really. So these are the questions that we're looking at. What need is that person trying to meet? What are they currently doing to meet this need? How much time do they spend meeting this need? How much money have they spent meeting this need? That's always a key one. If people are like, oh my God, it's such a problem. Really? How much time have you spent trying to fix it? None at all. You spend any money trying to buy a fix for that? No, God, no, I would never spend money on that. Maybe selling them something to solve that problem isn't the best choice. Are they currently looking for a solution to meet this need? Do they have any special requirements or needs for adopting a product? Obviously, these are all questions that you need to answer, that you really want to ask people just before they start using your product. It can be hard to find people who are just about to start using your product. That's actually kind of a tricky thing to do. So, little hack for that. Try asking people immediately after they've started using your product, because most of us can generally remember the immediate past fairly well. So you can ask people these, you can ask people these questions sort of in the immediate past tense. So before you found this, how much time had you spent, looking for a product like this? For new products, I want you to focus on, are they looking for a solution to meet this need? This is really important. Now, I know I've heard lots of people say things like, but no, the users don't even know that they need this. They don't even know that they have a problem. And yes, we can build products that solve problems that people don't know they have. But let me tell you, it's easier to sell a product that solves a problem that people know they have. Doesn't mean you have to do it. I'm just saying it's easier if they know that they have a problem and they're currently looking for a solution. It is much something. What all of these questions are doing is that they're trying to help you gauge user intent, both intent to solve the problem and intent to purchase. And people who have shown intent to purchase in the past are likely to do so again. But just generally sort of knowing motivations and intentions of people who are starting to use your product can help you answer all sorts of product questions. Things like knowing how much onboarding you're likely to have to do for folks, knowing how much convincing you're going to have to do in your messaging as you're bringing people on, to knowing how hard it's going to be to get them to give data. People who are much more motivated and interested in solving a problem are much more likely to hand over data that you need to make them successful. It can help you. It can also let you know how much competition you're likely to have, because, of course, while I say it's easier to solve known problems, that's true for everybody, and you're likely to have more competition in a space where there's a very well-known, easy-to-solve problem. Now, the next wedge is determining user product fit, and these are the questions about how you're going to take people who've engaged with your product and actually keep them a little bit interested. So, quick question. How often have you downloaded an app, opened it once, and then never gone back to it? Anybody? Yeah. Anybody play Pokemon Go for 5 minutes? Just checking. Does anybody even remember that? I wrote this slide deck 3 months ago, and that was totally relevant. Now everybody's like, Pokemon what now? Which sort of, makes my point for me. So, here are the questions that we need to answer. What behaviors, needs, or goals predict the actual usage of the product, not just the downloading, not just the signing up, but the actual usage of the product. How does this product meet those needs? And how does this product make the user better? That last one is something I especially want you to be focused on, because I want you to remember, nobody wants to use your product. I'm sorry. I always feel bad when I say that and people's faces fall. They're like, what? Nobody wants to use my... No, nobody wants to use any products. People just want things to be better, right? We want things to be better. We want to be entertained. We want to be better. We want to be improved. We just want things to go well. So they don't care about your product. They just care about making an improved version of themselves. So I want you to start thinking about that if you're not already. Now, these are all the questions you may have noticed that the product managers in the room probably think about all the time, at least hopefully the good ones. These are the questions about what the product is and what it does. And they're hopefully the questions that get addressed in good personas, but sometimes get left out. Because we talked about people focusing on the descriptions of the people as opposed to the actual behaviors, needs, and goals that drive usage. So the great thing about knowing the real and behaviors of the users is that it makes things like feature decisions so much easier. If you can answer those 3 questions, I promise you, those 3-hour meetings that you have where you argue about what to do next, you will have fewer of them, and they will be and there will be less arguing, because you will know, you won't be making as many assumptions and guesses about what people might want. You'll just know. You'll know what behavior, you'll know what problem you're trying to solve, you'll know what needs you're trying to fulfill. And I want to be clear on this because somebody always brought up at around this time, but it's different in enterprise. Our users have to use our product. They're locked in. They don't have a choice. Right? Was anybody thinking that? This is a safe space. You can say yes. No one ever admits that. But it's true, right? I make internal tools for a company. They have to use the thing I make. They don't get an option. I could abuse that if I wanted to. But here's the thing. And I want to, trust me. Here's the thing. You can focus entirely on your customer and not but there is a problem with doing that. These days, a lot of decision makers at large companies are demanding something that they didn't used to demand. They're demanding proof that your product actually does the thing that you do. They're demanding things like analytics, and they're demanding actual results. And let me give you a little example of what happens if you only focus on your customers. So let's say that you have a big CRM system that shall remain nameless. And it is fantastic as long as all of the salespeople put in really detailed notes about everything that they do. Okay, it's super good. As long as all of the salespeople are recording all of this data. If they do that, the sales managers have so much insight into their pipeline. They know what's going to happen. They can predict, revenue 3 quarters out. It's fantastic. And what do the salespeople do? They put their notes into the system. I see people shaking their heads. They put their notes in the system. There are things like called Bob, made phone call, sent email. And what happens is the managers get these reports that are crap. They don't deliver on all of the things that they were promised because the end user, their needs aren't being met, and so they're not they're not actually being good users. So it turns out that when you do something like this, suddenly that lock-in isn't so locked in because renewal time comes around, and what happens? They don't renew. They move on to something else that actually addresses the customer and the end user. So I just like to tell that little horror story that I think we have all seen at this point when we're talking about actually understanding the needs, not just of the customers, not just of the person writing the check, but also of the end user. Now, the next wedge in the user map is determining the context of use. Now, this is probably the section that the user researchers and UX designers are thinking about the most, right? This is the ones that we care deeply about. And I say we because I've spent a lot of time as a user experience designer. Decisions about our products, just in general, all of us. Where are we when we make those decisions? In the office, right? Generally, or, at our desks. Sometimes in the shower, but generally in the office. But where are your users when they're using your product? Could be anywhere. Or could be anywhere. Could be in the car, on the train, in bed, on the couch, in the office. Who the hell knows? We let them use them anywhere now. It's terrible. Right? Used to be that you just knew that they'd be at their desktop computer in their office back in the 90s, or as I call them, the good old days. But now, they're everywhere. They'd be walking down the street, shouting things into their watch like a crazy person. But the thing is, all of those different contexts of use have an enormous impact on all of the product decisions that we're making. It matters what helps us decide what platform things should be on, and whether we do have a smartwatch app, or it's a mobile app, or it's VR or AR, and it has a tremendous impact on how we design things. So you need to know the answer to these questions. With whom will they use it? Is that virtually, in person, some combo? Where will they use the product? And when and how often will they use the product? And make sure that you don't just know the answer to those questions, make sure that you know the why behind all of those questions. Do they use the product alone because they want to be alone? Or because that's the only option that you've given them? Do they want to connect with other people or not? That's an important question. A few years ago, everybody was really keen on making everything social, right? Let's make enterprise social. Let's make app social. Not everything is social. Putting a "what are you doing right now" feed on everything is not the correct answer to absolutely everything. It doesn't improve everything. But, just like some things should be done on mobile, and some things should be done for the car, and some things should be in VR, and oh my God, some things should not be VR. So you just need to understand the answer to those questions and the why behind them so that you can make better decisions about whether or not it should be in VR. Probably shouldn't. So last but certainly not least, we need to think about the future. Again, just trying to inject a little mystery. Great products are things that people develop a relationship with over time. The products change along with the needs of the users to keep people happy. And you need to understand how your product is going to stay relevant to people and not be something that, I half the Pokemon and now I'm bored. So these are the questions. Why will they keep using it over the course of the next few years? How will their usage change over the next few months and the next few years? And what will be different about the user over the course of months or years? So this is the aspirational part of product development and how the user's behavior will have changed over time. But really the question that you're answering here is, what are you going to do to deserve that person's attention for the next year, 2 years? And honestly, these are questions that are either discussed endlessly in startup meetings where everybody is, imagining how great the future's going to be when we're all on our yachts in 3 years. Or, sometimes they're just entirely ignored. If we have a brand new product, these should be the kinds of things that we think about, that we address, that we approach, and then that we move on. You don't want to spend an enormous amount of time on this when you have a brand new product, because the answers to all of these questions will be based on a tremendous number of assumptions. The most dangerous assumption is that anybody will even stick around for a couple of weeks, much less 6 months. You don't really need to plan for 6 months when you're still at the planning for day 2. On the other hand, if we have a product already and we have some power users, the best way to get the answer to these questions is to go talk to the people who became power users, and then also people who maybe tried the product and didn't become power users, and try to understand the difference. How are the power users different? What was their journey? How did they change? How did they start out? Where are they now? What help do the new people need to become power users? Now, I told you that I would get back to you for those of you who said that, who said which user, because some of you who have multiple different types of users, like buyers and sellers, customers and end users, free trial users, small businesses, I don't know, all sorts of different things, have noticed that it is literally impossible to answer all of these questions. You probably hate me right now, and I'm cool with that. That's fine. Take Facebook, for example, again. They have, 2 billion users, 1.5 billion users, like every day. They have a lot of different types of users. I mean, you couldn't make a user map for Facebook, right? Because those 1.5 billion users, the only thing they have in common is a Facebook login, probably, across all of them. But see, they don't make every single part of the product for every single user, sort of obviously, right? They have celebrities, they have businesses, they have advertisers, they have content partners, they have your high school friends, they have people who live stream video, and people who do nothing but make inspirational cat memes, something. This is the ad manager interface, actually, and I'm sure there are lots of moms who use it, moms who are also digital marketers. I happen to know people who are both. One can do both. But, this interface is used sort of more in their context as a digital marketer than in their context as a mom. Before Facebook makes anything new, they have to decide which user this feature is going to be targeted at. Now, if you have a brand new product, you may not run into this problem, but I guarantee you that if you have something that's been around for more than 6 months or a year, you have to think, what kind of this thing I am making, this feature, this change, this bug, whatever it is I'm doing, who is this going to benefit? Because I guarantee you the answer will not be everybody. It almost never is. Because the thing that improves things for the inspirational cat meme is not the same thing that's going to improve things for, a brand that's trying to facilitate engagement with digital native millennials, or whatever it is that brands do on Facebook. I've never really been clear on that. See, what I failed to tell you was that you actually need one map for each of your different users, so you still have to figure out who each one of them is. For example, if you have a marketplace, you're going to have buyers and sellers. 2 maps, at least, because they're going to have very different needs and goals. They're going to have very different channels through which you reach them. They're going to have different influencers. They're going to have different features. They're going to have different right? So that's fine. Make more than one map. You can even name the person and write the type of user at the bottom, if that's the kind of thing that you are into. So, question for you. How many of you here think that you know the answer to all of these questions for one of your users, for one type of user? Anyone? Anyone? I really have to change this next slide. How would you know you were right if you did get the answer to all of these questions? It's a good question, and I'm really glad I asked it. So the most important part of the map are these little boxes. I have a pointer that I'm going to use. There, right there, little validated boxes. You don't get to check that box until you have validated answers to each of these questions are correct, right? And by validated, I mean you've gone out and you've gathered data and you've tried to prove yourself wrong. You've done qualitative or quantitative or both, right? Some kind of research to understand, figure out if this thing that you are asserting to be true is actually true. You've tried to prove yourself wrong. That's always the key. You know what wrong would look like. You know what right would look like. And you're like, yes, this user is a real person and exists. While the user map is a little harder to get wrong than some of the other things that I talked about earlier, you can still screw it up. I mean, I won't underestimate you. I could screw it up. See, it's not useful if it's all just based on guesswork and optimism. The map is if the answers to the questions are true representations of the people in the world. The questions are just a guide, right? The answers are the only important part. There's one other trick to it that I want to share with you. One of the things that I absolutely hate about personas and customer journey maps has nothing to do with the tools and has everything to do with user experience designers. They always seem to be beautiful, right? They're always on these like giant posters, like professionally printed, and somebody spent a lot of time thinking about the fonts and like their stock photos, and right, you've got one, you've got at least one hanging in the office, right? And you're like, people walk by it and they're like, "What's that pretty thing?" And you're like, "Oh, that's a thing that we did about 2 years ago. It's the user persona." "Oh, do you do anything with that?" "No." I mean, we spent 6 months making that poster, but we don't actually use it for anything, but it looks nice. This is how they're generally used. It's kind of a designer thing. I get it. We have to have something to do. That's not how these should work. These are not about that, right? These should look like that with sticky notes all over them. See, I'm a big fan of having information radiators around the office, or if you're remote, I work a lot with remote teams, having them digitally. Information radiators, of course, are things like posters or giant screens with data on them. They are something that we keep around us and constantly visible so that we are reminded of things that are important for us on a daily basis. These are things that we should be thinking about all the time, right? These are things that provide us with instant information that is useful for us in our day-to-day lives. We need to use them to not lose sight of what's important. But I like my information radiators to look like this, because it makes them really easy to change later when we find out that we were wrong, or when we find out that something has changed. Because none of these are static documents. Users change. Your product changes. You're going to get new users. You're going to find new channels. You're going to find new types of users. You're going to realize that you were entirely wrong about the aspirational future of your power users, that they actually want something entirely different. This happens. That's okay. We need to acknowledge the fact that that's going to change, and when it changes, our implementation of that understanding should also change, and it should be very, very easy to change and should never involve reprinting an enormous poster. So I just want you to embrace the temporal nature of your knowledge. I want you to, the next time you're thinking of making a persona, or you're thinking of making a customer journey map, any of these sorts of things, the next time you just feel that you have some questions that you need answered about your users, give the user map a try. And don't feel bad about changing some of the questions to make them more relevant to you. If you want to add some things into those big sections, please do. And please share that information with me and let me know if you customized it and how you customized it for your particular team and why. Because I would really like to know that, because I like to get feedback on this too. I've run this with lots and lots of teams. There are always new questions that people are asking, or things that are very specific to your particular product. If you are interested in exercises and maps and funnels and all sorts of visual representations of things like this, you should check out the new book, Build Better Products. It is chock full of them, as well as with exercises to actually help you make these decisions, and also to involve your team in making these decisions. Because remember, we can't do this all by ourselves. We are all making product decisions every day, all the time, and everybody on the team has to know who their user, and they have to know the answers to all of these questions to really make better decisions. the book is available now. So thank you so much. Until you get the book, I am also happy to answer any questions, and feel free to reach out to me here.
We'll take questions. Please raise your hand if you want a question. One of our mic runners will run the mic so that everybody else can hear the question too.
We have a question over here.
So I haven't read the first book, so should I buy the first book or go straight to the second book?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I wrote the second book 3 years later, so I'm much smarter now 3 years ago, but also probably more jaded. The new book is longer, so better value for your money. First book's probably funnier, honestly. The second book is really more about helping teams make decisions. It has a lot of specific exercises you can run with your team. A lot of things, like the user map that are sort of templates and guides. So it's a little bit more, I think, practical and hands-on. The first one's a little bit more of an overview, and it's very much more, it's more targeted at startups. So there you go. Well, I think either would be fine. I love them both equally. That's not true. I like the second one way more. Question here. Oh.
Hi. What feedback have you received from players who have tried this in response to sort of like those not old, but those other methods, and what, have been some of the common notable improvements that using this method have shown?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of people use in conjunction with some of the other methods. So, they might do personas and this. This, I think, would probably, I want to say if you were going to replace one of the other ones, maybe, I like customer journey maps too, but it does sort of cover a little bit more of the, the user. Although customer journey maps sort of cover the arc of the user's interaction with the product, this really covers the arc of the user. So you can really use it in conjunction with any of them. What I like to think about this, I call it a map for a reason, because it gives you the questions that you need to go out and answer in research. If you can then use any of those other tools to sort of help you synthesize the research. I think empathy maps are fantastic for synthesizing customer feedback and user research. So you can kind of use them all together. What I hate having teams do, though, is focusing, especially design teams. I think design teams can, and I'm totally, this is a thing that I do all the time. This is very bad. But I think we can focus a little bit too much on the design artifact. We can get a little too precious about I've made these 15 different design artifacts. And it's like, okay, well, the whole point, you need to make product decisions kind of right now. So use this as a guide to the types of questions that you're going to try to get answered using qualitative and quantitative research, and use any of the other tools along with it. But like I said, it's not necessarily a replacement. It's just you use any of them that make sense for you at that moment. But try not to do all of them, because seriously, who's got that kind of time?
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
When you're using the empathy map of user or make the customer journey map to understand, sometimes it's based on your observation or you hypothesize.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you make sure all the findings about user are objective?
So all of your findings about your user will never be objective. We're humans. We have inherent bias. But I think that one of the things that you can do, and there's some stuff in the book about making predictions and then understanding whether or not those predictions come true, spotting patterns, writing them down. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to do iterative interviewing. So doing interviews with 3 to 5 people, not at the same time, 3 to 5 different people, noticing the patterns, writing them down, and then talking to 3 to 5 more people and seeing if the patterns that I've written down actually hold. It can be very sort of look back after you've done a bunch of research and find the patterns, but you don't know for a fact that they're patterns until you've predicted them and you've seen them repeat. If you're just talking about sort of like getting bias out of research, lots of books on getting bias out of research and lots of great books on learning more about, good interviewing techniques and good ways of doing all sorts of different user research techniques. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but 100% objective. I mean, I would like it to be, but we're not robots. If no one else has any questions, then we can all just go back and drink the beer. Or I can answer questions, that's fine too. No? All right, go map some users. Thank you so much.
Well, guys, it's not completely over. Dan will be here in a minute.
Do we need another question? Like I could stand up here and tell jokes or something until Dan comes back, since he's just snuck out.
I have a quick question.
You have a question? Okay, sure. We're gonna ask more questions.
So just real quick, in terms of design products, how much would you say, designing your product for a very specific end user use case is kind of the norm or should be the norm, versus designing for more a broad base of users and or use cases, and then using that data to fine tune your product, starting kind of a funnel effect, like it's very broad, but that there's the product need is out there, the fit is out there, and then funneling it down kind of.
I have a different talk that you should watch. It's called So You Want to Be the Next Facebook. It was from Lean Startup Conference 2015. I am very much in the camp of pick a narrow group of people and focus and nail that small group of people and make a product, especially for brand new. This is really brand new products, right? This is for things that you don't know if you have a user. You want to focus on solving one problem for one very identifiable group of people. And you can then expand from there into adjacent markets. If you try to go too broad, too early, and you try to make something that's going to appeal to everybody, it almost never works. It's almost always, the problem partially is that you end up getting a tremendous amount of feedback from a tremendous number of different kinds of people, and you sort of don't know what to leave or what to listen to or what advice to take or what feedback is actually useful.
So a follow-up would be, so let's say, we define it as the product is targeting small, medium businesses, okay? And then let's say it's one broad industry sector, but it doesn't differentiate. Let's say it's auto, but it wouldn't differentiate between like an auto detailer, an auto supply company, and an auto dealership, right? I mean, are you saying you should really just focus on whatever how your product can solve the needs for an auto dealership?
At least. I mean,
Okay.
you want to narrow it down at least. And again, you're thinking a little bit demographically there. I mean, those are still kind of, demographics, a little bit better when, it's specifically jobs. But I don't really know anything about auto detailers, I'll be honest. But is there a shared problem for all auto detailers? Or, I mean, might there be, because I know businesses, sometimes they're small, like sometimes they're franchises, or sometimes they're local businesses, or sometimes they, are very profitable, and sometimes they're struggling, and sometimes they're in very large cities, and sometimes they're in very small cities. Like, what is it depends. Do all auto detailers have the shared problem that you are solving with your product? The answer might be yes. Again, I don't know. Probably not. You're really going to want to focus on what is the problem that you're solving, what is the behavior of that particular group of people, where you could say, if you gave them a sort of a simple screener, a simple survey, just to find out a little bit more about them, that you would know the questions that you would need to ask, that if they answered those questions correctly, you would have about an 80% positive belief that they would be users of your product, right? Like you actually want, and if it's just like, are you a mom? Yes, no. And I kind of go back to mom. So like, are you a mom? Yes, no. That does not predict whether or not somebody's going to use your product. I don't know with auto detailers.
Yeah.
Maybe it does. I would guess not. I would guess a little narrower.
So let's say, just another quick follow-up here, if let's say you're at that 70-80% assurance that there isn't a need, and it's broad enough to appeal to all users of that, broad industry, automotive, right? So then, to what extent do you want to design your product, to meet even more specific needs for the auto detailer versus their folks versus, letting it be custom, more customized product, or being more general, helping them to learn what they don't know, or show them kind of the 60% of what they need that they'll use 80% of the time, type of something like that.
Yeah, this is why designing products is hard. Those are all great questions. They're really. I'm going to give you the. I'm going to give you the slogan of user experience designers everywhere, which is, "It depends." If anybody knows how to say that in Latin, I would like to create a coat of arms for user experience designers. It's just, it depends. The answer is you're really focusing on the problem. And if you could have people across 6 different verticals that all had this particular problem, but the question would really be, will the same solution actually work across all of those different types of companies, or do they need different messaging? Do they need different, special fields and forms? Do they, all calculate profit a different way? I mean, you can feel having the same problem, but you have to be very, very, very careful that all of these folks want this problem solved in the same way, and that they all want the same set of features. I would argue that you want something simpler with fewer features, especially to start out with, to really understand if you are solving a problem for that small group of people. Now, if you want something that then can expand and that can solve potentially problems for many other people, I will also caution you against we'll just make it custom. Because customizing products is a great way to go out of business by supporting 1,000 different instances of the same product. It's just hard. You're just making things harder. Yes. Oh, do we
Do you have any advice or caveat for trying to understand multi-sided business?
Don't do it. Oh, you mean besides that? Yeah, I mean, if you've got a multi-sided marketplace, you really, really, really have to understand all of those things that I talked about for 2 different groups of people. You also have to understand how you're going to get one group of them into the product before you have the other one, because otherwise the traditional empty room problem. One of the things that a lot of people do is that they will focus very specifically either on you can focus very specifically on a location. If it's something like Uber, we're not going to go try to deliver cars to people in every single city all at once. We're going to start in a very specific location. You could start like eBay did with, category, collectibles. That's something that there's already a big marketplace for, and, then you have to go out. You could do something like what Tinder did, where they actually went out and did a grassroots marketing effort where they went to sororities and got sororities to sign up on the platform by going into the room going, here, sign up, let's take your picture, let's do this. And then went over to the fraternities and said, look at how many women from your college are nearby and on this platform. So, I mean, all of these are super hard. All of these are platforms. The coaches. that have been successful, but it's really getting very specific. Oh, see now we have more questions.
I leave for 1 second.
I tried to
Everyone
end it
clams
early and have
up.
drinks. I don't know.
We got more questions? Who's got one? Liddy.
Hi.
Hi.
It sounds like you're kind of combining personas, persona development with jobs to be done, the job to be done technique. What is the ultimate job to be done by any user?
I feel like jobs to be done is one of those frameworks that's really good, but that came out of mistakes that people made with other frameworks that already existed that were supposed to kind of do the same thing. So in my world, personas with things like behaviors and needs and goals and what the user is hiring the product to do and all of that stuff. So again, jobs to be done is a fine framework. It's great. The user map specifically is, I don't think it replaces that necessarily. I think that there is a place for the jobs to be done framework within the user map. Probably in the, I think that all of these frameworks could kind of fit into the user map at some point. That one probably is in the like product market or the product user fit segment. Yeah. Again, I'm not bad-mouthing jobs to be done. I like it as a framework, just like I like all of them. Anything that you can do to get to know your user better at sort of all the different points in their life cycle, I'm for.
Any more? Oh, Doug, you got a question? All right.
You don't have to.
You threw your hand up. Did you not?
We can all go home.
Here we go. Okay, well, here we go.
Well, first on the total side, before I ask Laura a question, I built a multi-sided marketplace, and my first advice is don't do it as well. But I'd be happy to chat anyway, because I tried to build a generic one earlier this year, and we kind of put it on the shelf, because people didn't have any money. So my question for you is, I'd never really heard I'd want to use one of these early stage, late stage, big company, small company. Is there any rhyme or reason that you found?
The whole point of them is that you're eventually going to you will eventually over the life cycle of or the product, somebody in your company will probably have to answer all of these questions. These questions will have to be answered. So I don't want to tell you, if you're at a big company that already has a product, don't bother doing one of these. You might want to do it just to make sure that everybody on the team shares all the information that may actually exist across all the different departments, right? Like marketing might have the answer to all of those questions in the first segment. That'd be great, The CEO might know exactly what she wants to see for the future of the product, so be people in your company that have all these. So you might want to do it, just like I said, to share the knowledge and get it out there. If you're just starting a new product, you definitely want to start one of these, but you won't be able to really finish it. You won't be able to check off all the things because it's just those questions are. Some of those questions are. But don't let the stage of your company stop you from doing it. If you're doing an early stage idea, I would definitely do it. I would probably focus on the first 3. Yeah. you're going to focus a little bit on like content and things, but don't worry about the future too much. Like I said, the future for startups is like 2 weeks from now.
Okay, we'll do last question here.
That's cool. Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. And actually, I was just thinking about something you just said you said that try to answer some of the questions you're not going to be able to answer. And you said earlier that you should attempt to kind of make predictions about when you're doing a lean testing, 3 to 5 people, and try to make predictions how the future tests, the iterations will work. it just came to my mind right here. Does it make sense to answer as many of those questions as possible, even if you're making a prediction that you can't actually really say what it's going to be until the future, but then it gives you a bit of a baseline to see if you were correct.
Yes, you are not allowed to check the box, and I will be
Okay.
watching. You may not check the validated box until it is validated, or until you've attempted to invalidate it. Sometimes just trying to answer these questions, what it does two things, especially if you do it as a team exercise, which I always recommend that people do all these things as team exercises. And if you do them as a team exercise, first of all, it will give you great insight into whether everybody on your team has the same ideas about all of these things, which they do not. And that is a really good thing to surface within your company. So making guesses is totally fine. It also will sometimes tell you things just like where people come with all of these random answers, and what that's really telling you is we don't know, and that's telling you, okay, this is a thing that we need to go out and research. And it can give you a bit of a map for, okay, what are the questions that we need answered next? And again, you don't need to know the answer of these questions at the very beginning of the product. I think it's good to have a vision and an idea about what the answers to these questions might be, but that's why we write them on sticky notes, because we get them wrong. But take your best shot.
All right, cool. Let's
Thanks so
give Laura a
much.
big round of applause. Thanks a lot, Laura, for an awesome talk.